Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first, very first episode of the Disco Pants podcast. The first official one on the Disco Pants podcast's own YouTube page. I'm Connor Bromley. I'm joined by the Sunderland Echo's James Copley. James, how are you feeling? You're looking very red.
It's warm, Connor. It is very warm. Very hot in the northeast of England, which is quite nice. So I'm going to take the dog for a walk, maybe at some point soon, and hopefully get a bit more bronzed. Yeah, she'll, maybe I'll walk her by the sea. She can get in.
Yeah, we took the dog to Roker this morning, and he was just basically chasing the ball in the sea the whole time.
I've actually been going with a friend of mine down to Roker Beach on a morning and throwing ourselves in the sea, which has been quite nice.
Oh, yeah.
Andy, shout out Andy if you're watching. Yeah.
Happy days. Right, we want to talk about Sunderland, because we always do. That's all we talk about. got some sign language going on there.
Yeah, I'm trying to communicate that I'm on a podcast, but it's just not understand.
I will leave it in. People can see the behind the scenes.
I'm on a podcast.
There we go. Right, we got loads of stuff to talk about with Sunderland. Do you want to talk a little bit about Jose Fonte, our new coach coming in? We'll talk about that. Any sort of transfer nuggets? There's been a few players linked. I kind of want to get your feeling and thoughts on Matias Soule, because I feel like that one potentially has a bit of legs in, so we'll talk about that as well. But where do you want to start? What do you want to talk about first?
Shall we do Jose Fonte then?
Yeah, okay. Let's talk about Jose Fonte. What do you make of that then? A coach coming in, Premier League experience, centre-back in the past, and obviously knows Ronaldo seemingly quite well. But what did you make of this news? Came out of nowhere.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Obviously, Regis Lebris has been through a couple of assistant coaches already. There was Pedro Ribeiro who went, and obviously there was Luciano Vulcanos. Sorry, and I believe, and people might correct me if I'm wrong on this, but they were more defensive coaches for Sunderland with Lebris sort of targeting that area of his staff. So obviously this makes sense from that point of view, doesn't it? With Fonte being an ex-Central defender, he's hugely experienced. He won the Euros, ex-Southampton, ex-West Ham, ex-Crystal Palace, and I think actually, having thought about this, I believe this is his first coaching role, isn't it? Because he's just retired from playing at 42, which is incredible, really. But when we did that goalkeeping video, Connor, you cast your minds back to the role that Simon Moore is playing in terms of he's almost like a player coach. He doesn't obviously play for Sunderland very often, but he feeds back directly. And I just wonder if having another person on the staff who has been a player quite recently and knows what gets players, sort of ticking. He knows what it's like to be a player. He has that muscle memory of what it's like being a footballer in the modern day. I wonder if that will be quite beneficial. Obviously, I think there'll be another piece to this that, Fonte will be hugely ambitious, first job in coaching, obviously quite young, quite bright. They've obviously identified something there. So I think this is really, really positive. I know when Vulcano left, everybody wanted someone to rebolster their coaching staff, and they've done this. And I think it just speaks to everything's just constantly evolving. And I think that's good. A lot of people have read into the exits of Ribeiro and Vulcano that they've probably got their own reasons. But you look at, say, Manchester United under Sir Alex Ferguson, he very much refreshed his coaching staff quite often, didn't he? He had Steve McLaren, he had Carlos Queiroz, he had Brian Cade at one point. There was various different ones that come along. Pep Guardiola's done the same. Obviously, he had Maresca, Arteta, and then he ended up with Jurgen Klopp's number 2 last season, didn't he? Whose name escapes me. So I think it's good for Pep Linders. I think it's good for a football club and a coaching staff actually to have new, fresh ideas. Sometimes a little bit of friction can create a little bit of fire as well, which is good. So new voice, somebody who has played football recently, I think I can see the benefits. So I was quite pleased to see this come off. And, Fonte's played with Cristiano Ronaldo. He's got a fair few war stories. I imagine he'll command the respect of the dressing room quite quickly. Brilliant for somebody like Dan Ballard to go and chat to about playing in the Premier League and, defending attackers using your body, all of this sort of stuff. So, yeah, I was quite pleased to see this go through. Obviously, did come out of nowhere, didn't it? It was just sort of popped up and it was done. But, I think this is really, really good, Connor, to be honest.
Do you think that there's a potential that, everyone's fixated on an assistant manager? That's like it's because that's what we expect in football. You've got a manager, you've got an assistant, and they tag team everything together. You've got like Peter Reid and Bobby Saxton, and they work together and they do everything together, and one's good cop, one's bad cop. And that's often, I think, what people expect. Is there a world where Sunderland have a manager or a head coach in Regis Lebris and then essentially just has staff under him and there isn't necessarily an assistant manager, or do you still think they'll look to have an actual assistant?
Well, the way they've done it so far is that they don't really have an assistant manager, do they? They have assistant coaches. So you've got Barcarini, who's the ex-goalkeeping coach. You've got Ramon Madia. You've got Michael Proctor. You've got James Brain. And then you've got Neil Cutler, who heads up the goalkeeping department. So there will be seniority within that group, I would imagine. I get the impression that Madeira is maybe he's number two to Lebris, but obviously Barcarini's quite high up in the pecking order. And then Michael Proctor has been there a long time. So I think the seniority of it all is certainly more muddied. Obviously, you'd have to sort of be at the academy, I guess, to get a grasp of that. But no, I think you're right to point out there isn't really a head coach and a dedicated number two. It seems to be that there's a group of assistant coaches who work quite closely together. But as I say, some will be more experienced than others within that. But you're right to point out that there is no sort of dedicated, he is the assistant manager. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. That, there's different ways of doing things, isn't there? And perhaps maybe he's not being reliant on one assistant manager to sort of do everything. We know football is so big these days, the level of preparation. You have to delegate, you have to divide things up. And that's why I think Fonte coming in and being a sound defensive mind is really quite positive, because we know that's such a big part of Sunderland's sort of identity in the Premier League, wasn't it? Was being pretty rugged defensively, especially during those early days in the Premier League. So I think it just speaks to the way football clubs are evolving now. Back in the day, even when Sunderland were last in the Premier League, you had a manager, as it was called, you had an assistant manager, and you had a couple of coaches, and that was maybe it. Maybe he's a specialist goalkeeping coach. But now the operation and the football operation of these clubs has expanded, and I think it wouldn't be surprised if this is the last we hear about new coaching additions. Obviously, we did that goalkeeping episode, which everybody could go and watch, but the goalkeeping department's being restructured. Obviously, there's a little bit of restructuring within Lebris's team. When we spoke to Florent Gasolfi, he wants to push all areas of the club forward very quickly. That's why you've seen the likes of Graham Murphy go and be replaced by Matt Craddock. Obviously, John Hewitson coming up to be head of academy as well. So there's a period of change, period of flux. But again, to reiterate, I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think sometimes actually the worst thing you can do is stand still, Connor. And again, I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I'm reminded of a couple of conversations I've had with Sunderland staff members when Manchester United came into town, and just little things like their level of kitmen compared to Sunderland. I think they outnumber Sunderland like 10-2 in terms of kitmen, and in terms of analysis as well. That their analysts are like 15 to Sunderland's like 4 or 5 or 6, and Sunderland's team are really talented and have punched well above the weight. But I think for Florent Gasolfi now, holistically at the academy within Sunderland's structure, it's about beefing that structure up and changing things a little bit and tweaking it, but still keeping the core of what has made the club a success. And I just see this as the next step on the road to that, to be honest.
Let's talk about transfers a little bit, because I think I've seen on my YouTube people are getting a little bit tetchy. We're on the 9th of July. Players are back in training yesterday. People are getting a little bit sort of like, are we going to start making some moves? Now, the Premier League, I think it's heating up a little bit. I'm starting to see a bit more chatter. Obviously, we had Bruno Guimaraes, that news yesterday. Crystal Palace are signing Oscar Menguiza, who's a player we've been linked to. So we're beginning to see some sort of movement, I would say. Which suggests to me that in the next week or so, we're going to start seeing Sunderland get linked more. Now, Matias Soule is a player we've been linked with from Roma, because Gasolfi knows him from when he was at Roma. He signed him before. So I felt like this one feels like it maybe has potentially a little bit of legs to it, but I don't know how you feel about it. He's a player that can play pretty much anywhere across the attacking third. He can play right wing, he can play in the 10, he can play as a number 9 as well. And I think we need them sort of players, because the last thing you want is to just have, as we kind of have had in the attacking third, we've had left wingers who can just play on the left, not really anywhere else. And I think sometimes a lack of versatility can hurt you. So I like the look of Matias Soule. Obviously, I've done a bit of digging on him. His numbers and whatnot are good as well. But yeah, that's sort of a two-pronged question. Number one, are you worried about the state of play in the transfer market? But number two, how do you feel about this Matias Soule link, and do you think there's any legs to it?
I'm not worried at all, just simply because Sunderland have less to do this summer. And we've spoken before in the Disco Pants podcast about that Sunderland didn't sign their first player, Enzo Lafayette, aside until around this time. I think it was the first week in July. We're now just into the second week of July. There's been the World Cup. We're starting to see an acceleration because obviously there are only 8 teams left in the World Cup. So obviously more deals are being done. There's more agent chat there. I mean, the Bruno Guimaraes story at Newcastle, as soon as Brazil's come out of the World Cup, then that's been pursued, hasn't it? So I'm not worried at all. Again, Sunderland are targeting fewer signings this summer. There's less to get done, so they have a little bit more time. I believe they will have prepared well for this window, just simply because, for my money, Connor, Sunderland was safe by New Year for me. So they've had a good run at this. I think they'll know exactly what they want to do. They'll have planned it. I back them to execute it. And yeah, they don't have to do as much as they did last summer. That is the big thing here. However, in 2 or 3 weeks, if we haven't had one through the door, obviously you do get a little bit concerned. On the Soule link, I was chatting to our friend Gavin Henderson on the Rope Report podcast about this. And what you're saying is right, Connor. It makes a lot of sense. He's a right winger. He knows Florent Gasolfi. AS Rome is a club we've dealt with before. His numbers are very good. He fits the profile. He's the right age. He's obviously talented. So it makes a lot of sense. But you question yourself because you think, is it just an easy sort of link to make from a foreign publications perspective? Just because they might look at it and go, well, Sunderland need a right winger, and Florent Gasolfi had it before. So I don't have necessarily any insight other than he does look like a player that would make sense and would fit. So I think that's probably promising. I think for me, Connor, the eye-catching thing was the level of fee, which is probably going to be around the 30 million mark or upwards. Now, that's a significant step up from the level of fee that Sunderland have spent on wingers previously. Obviously, with Talbi and Anguilo was a little bit less than that, probably around the 15 to 20 mark. Maybe it's a little bit more for Anguilo with the add-ons. But to me, this looks like it might be sort of a level above signing. And that's, the club might have different ideas and you might have different ideas, Connor, but that's my sort of want and wish from this transfer window, is that if we are going to sign a right winger, which obviously looks very likely, and we probably have to sign a right winger, I would like him to be more ready to go than perhaps a Talbi was. No disrespect to Talbi, because I really, really like Talbi. If you've heard me speak about Talbi before, you know I really, really rate him, and he obviously contributed well for Sunderland at times last season, but absolutely more of a developmental side in terms of being Premier League ready. Obviously, every signing's a gamble, and you don't necessarily know if this Soule can come in and hit the ground running and impact things immediately. But just given his numbers and his age and the team he's playing for and the league he's playing in, I would imagine he's a little bit more further along in his development. And I would really like to see that somebody to come in for a bit more of a fee and be a real sort of marquee signing across that attack who can come in and improve us. And I think that's what Florent Gasolfi wants to do. He wants signings that are going to come in and improve the first 11. And for me, fits the bill, but we're sort of yet to hear anything concrete on it. There's a lot of foreign reports and a lot of hearsay sort of kicking around. So I think it's absolutely, definitely one to watch and keep an eye on. But I imagine as well, talented kid, he's probably going to have suitors. And I think that's the other side to this transfer market, is that Sunderland obviously were competing with other clubs last season and last summer for players. They obviously competed with Leeds quite a bit and managed to beat them on a number of occasions. But you do wonder if the pool that Sunderland are now going to be looking at, there's going to be a lot more competition, European clubs in for some of these players. We've seen it really, actually, Sunderland and Newcastle and Brighton have been linked with a lot of the same players. There's not been loads of links, but those that have surfaced, I've noticed the clubs that are in for these players are a level above what Sunderland were perhaps last summer. So that's really interesting from a competitive standpoint.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because Newcastle look like they're getting Manzambi, who was linked with Sunderland, and then you see the fee, and you're like 40 plus million. I don't think Sunderland are going to be spending that on a midfielder. I feel like 30-ish is kind of where we cap. I don't know, maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe if the right player comes up, maybe they would spend more, but it is interesting looking at the fact that we are linked to them sort of players, and we are linked. Last year it was Leeds all the time. We were always in with the same players at Leeds. Obviously, Diarra and Siddiqui. Yeah, and Burnley as well. And this year, I don't think we've been linked to a player that Ipswich or Hull or Coventry have been after, which is
No.
yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, I think the idea of a Soule is good. I think as well with losing Mayenda, to buy in a right winger that can also play as a striker, I think is not a bad option, because it probably means that the player they bring in could replace both. We need to get a starting right winger, but also we've got Tarby waiting in the wings. We do have other players that can play on the right. Obviously, Chris Rigg can play on the right wing. Talby could also play on the right wing, and Gulo could play on the right wing if we needed him to. But I think why I like the look of Soule is because it means that we replace Mayenda, and we also get in a starting right winger. And I wonder if that plays into the thinking of selling Mayenda for the good price that they got, because it means they can put more resource then into that right winger striker position. Because Mayenda kind of could do that. He was a right winger when he played for Spain under 21s, but Lebris didn't trust him to play that position for whatever reason.
Not in the Premier League, no. He did it a couple of times in the Championship. He came in for Roberts to great effect, actually, but in the Premier League, he hardly ever did it, did he? I think the Mayenda sale is interesting because you imagine, despite the fact he wanted to leave, that Sunderland wouldn't have pulled the trigger on that if they weren't really, really confident they could get somebody, and probably a little bit sooner than we imagine. That would be my take on that.
Yeah, I'd agree. But yeah, would you, if you were signing that player, a Soule, say, do you think signing a right winger that can play up front makes sense, or do you think they'll go for right winger and a separate striker?
Oh, it's a good question. I think it makes sense, and we know that they like versatile players. If they sign Soule and he can play across the forward line, but predominantly from the right, I don't think that necessarily stops them signing someone more central if they feel that that's the way to go. Obviously, a lot will hinge on Wilson Isadore's future. Sort of feels like he's going to stay at the moment. Are you confident enough with Soule, who can deputise, and then Brobby and Wilson Isidore? Is that enough? Probably, because you've got versatile players who can come on from the left over to the right. But then if Soule gets injured, then you're starting to worry on that side of the pitch again. I guess you mentioned him, but the big unknown is Tarby, and he had a brilliant summer for the Ivory Coast. And do the club really back him to come in and have an effect on the Premier League season? We don't really know how good he is, just simply because we haven't seen him enough. So there is that to consider as well. There might be a master plan where they're going to sort of push him forward. I think we'll learn more in pre-season about that. But yeah, that would be my top line. Would be Sunderland do not mind a versatile player at all. I think you saw that actually when they signed Wilson Isidore. It's funny now looking back, but everyone was like, well, is he a left winger? Is he a striker? What type of player is he? Can play on the left, but he's absolutely, definitely a striker. Talby's been able to play left or right. Anguilo has played left or right. Adingra, I think, even played left and right for us, didn't he? So they do like a versatile player, that much is for sure. And the king of versatility at Sunderland is Trey Hume, the undisputed, undefeated king of versatility that Lebris absolutely loves, alongside Luke O'Nien, who's probably a close second. We know Miquele can play multiple positions. It's kind of an important thing to have in your squad these days, isn't it? You need players that can shift around, and none more so than up front, I think.
Yeah. I mean, we were even, I suppose, should we touch on Hitrauda, because he is Mr. Versatile. And I thought it was interesting. Minguiza hadn't really been linked with Crystal Palace, which makes me wonder if the links to him were actually maybe coming from agent driven. Like if it was, they were putting names out there, because it's weird to me that deal has happened and he wasn't linked to them, but he was linked very, very heavily with us, and Crystal Palace seemed to have just ghosted in. So it makes you wonder, were they using Sunderland's name as a pawn in that transfer saga? I'm not 100%
sure. There's all sorts of stuff like that goes on as well, let's face it.
But it also made me think, well, if we aren't getting Minguiza in, then Hitrauda he feels like a logical fit, because he would tick so many boxes for us. It would lessen the need for us to bring in a new defensive midfielder, even though I still think we need one anyway, but it lessens that need. It gets you a right back who can also play centre back, which lessens the load on Trey Hume. It lessens the load on Mukiele as well, and it lessens the load on the other centre-backs we've got. So I just look at Hitrauda and just think he's so versatile. You always call him a Swiss Army knife. That's exactly what he's like. He's got multiple tools in his shed. And I just look at him and think, does it make sense? If you can get that done for 18 million when you've sold Mayenda for 20 plus, does it make sense to push that one through and get that done?
And he's got multiple tools in his shed, not even a toolbox, his shed.
He's got a shed. He's got a shed, mate.
He's got a shed full of tools.
Well, the tools that he has are so big that he needs to have a
It
shed.
is. It's interesting that because really the last update we heard about that was in the retained list where it stated that Sunderland basically were going to try to sign him and that they're in discussions with him. So we haven't heard anything. There hasn't been really any reports even to the contrary or linking him with other clubs yet this summer. Obviously, he was at the World Cup with the Netherlands, didn't really play. Imagine he's been on holiday, but he's going to want a bit of clarity, I'd imagine, soon, in a sense that he's going to want a pre-season under his belt at some point. So it doesn't make sense for him to sort of sign for a club soon. The other side to that is, does it actually make more sense for him to wait a little bit and get the best possible offer? I think he probably knows that Sunderland's going to be on the table this summer, whatever happens. So is he just sort of playing the field, and who can blame him? But I agree. I think it makes loads of sense to sign him just because of his massive shed and his array of tools that he can bring out. Oh dear. The analogies get worse and worse on this podcast.
On this brand new podcast. So there we are. I would love to see Hitrauda sign, but he's probably if you away with the Dutch. They went out early, I suppose, early-ish for them, but he's probably still got another 2 weeks off.
I really wonder about, like, if you're going to have talks with Gertruida and Jola Brice or Florent Gasolfi, the player in this camp are going to be saying, when are you going to play me? Where are you going to play me? And how can we legitimately answer that question? Can we give him assurances? Because as good a player as he is and as big as a shed that he's got, he doesn't start at right back over Mukwele and over Hume, I don't think, unless one of them gets injured, really. If everyone's fit in midfield, he doesn't start there. We do need a left back, but that's not his most natural position. And you would assume we would sign someone ahead of him. So where's he playing? That's the big thing. And I know we've got Europe, and I know we've got more games, but
we've got a lot of games.
I would imagine we have. But I imagine he wants to have assurances somewhere, surely, because, like, let's face it, he's good enough to play regularly anywhere. Yeah, so if I'm him, I'm just sort of like. And it's a nice problem to have for Sunderland because obviously it means the squad's quite strong. But yeah, if I'm sat in the room as his representative, I'm like, well, when am I going to play?
But if you're playing, there's quite a lot of players like this where we've got, like, Chris Rigg is one of them. Tarby, probably. If we buy in a new right winger, Tarby are probably one of them. Maybe even you could put Angulo and Talby are going to be fighting very fiercely for that position. But I think we've got quite a few around the squad where you're like, right, how many games are you going to play? But the fact is that we're probably going to play, provided we have a decent run in Europe, 55 to 60 games. So if you play that many games, that means that, you're not going to start. Nordi Mukiele can't start 50 games next season. Trey Hume might. Maybe he's the one exception. But these players are, Dan Ballard. You know that Dan Ballard picks up injuries. It's just a sorry, unfortunate reality. We know Alderete has had niggles. He had niggles, obviously, away on international duty. So these players won't stay fit, and the more games they play, the more likely they are to get injuries. So I just think you probably can't say, well, you can't guarantee anyone the amount of games they're going to play, fundamentally.
And that'll be the argument that, you have to come in, work within the group and sort of prove your worth and get into the team. You mentioned them, but I actually think this, just to go off on a tangent, this upcoming season is going to be really interesting for Chris Rigg, because obviously he was deployed on the right mostly last season, wasn't he? And he did well there in flashes. But if you've got Tarby coming into the picture, if you sign another right winger and say he starts playing Habib Diarra there more regularly, because we know Habib Diarra can play out on the right-hand side and did it effectively against Everton when he came on, does that mean Chris Rigg's now more of a midfielder? That's obviously his more natural position. That's where he played for Sunderland in the Championship. Is the plan now to reintegrate Chris Rigg into the middle of the park? And is that why the noise is coming out of Sunderland earlier on in the season or summer from Keith Downey, was that Sunderland weren't looking to sign a midfielder because they believe that Rigg's going to be an option there, along with Diarra, Enzo, Lafay, Noah Siddiqui, Granit Xhaka, Stern. That picture interests me because looking at it from my fans' head point of view, I'm like, with the extra games, wouldn't mind signing a midfielder, particularly somebody who could just do what Xhaka does. Easier said than done, because they're very, very hard to come by. But I just wonder, and this may be me sort of looking into it too far and making a mountain out of a molehill. But with the messages that have come out, do Sunderland actually feel that they're pretty well stocked in midfield already with Rigg moving in?
Maybe, and I think that it's a big trust for Chris Rigg. I mean, I've said countless times this is a big pre-season for him. I think that there's no doubt that he is technically a Premier League player in terms of his technical quality on the ball. I felt at times last season he was pushed off the ball a little bit, and I think that is the one sort of criticism that you'd have of him, that he is too lightweight maybe a little bit. So that's why I think this next season in particular is the time where he needs to fill out, which will happen naturally and put on that weight. And I think if he can do that, he'll really kick on. I look at Lewis Miley at Newcastle. He was like a fringe player, and then last season you saw him and you're like, oh, you're now a senior player. Like, you look like a senior player, and I think Chris Rigg needs that.
Doesn't it go to show, though, the different levels at the Championship and the Premier League? Because we would all accept maybe that the Championship is a really good physical league. Chris Rigg, to me, didn't look out of place in the Championship in terms of his physicality. Actually, I thought at times he gave as good as he got. But the Premier League is just such a different level of speed, intensity, endurance, and even physicality that you're completely right. He did look out of place in terms of his muscle mass last season. He did look like quite small, didn't he? And I never really felt that about him in the Championship. What I will say about Chris Rigg, though, he's been training like a madman. He's had a massive pre-season before Sunderland's pre-season. He's been working with Carl Lawson and Reece Greenwood, who both used to play for Sunderland, who now have their own coaching setup. He's also been working with Tommy Watson, a lot of the North East lads who came through the academy together, Josh Robinson, Ben Metcalf. They all trained separately in the summer, and it looks to me like Chris Rigg has been working really, really, really hard. So that's exciting because we know how driven he is. I actually spoke with his youth coach at Sunderland, Ben Carr, recently. You can read those articles on the Sunderland Echo website, and he was just like, what set him apart was always his mentality. He was obviously really, really talented. And he told me a nice story about when Chris Rigg was playing for his junior side, and he had the opportunity to go and play for Wallsend Boys or a big sort of boy side in the region, but he never wanted to. He wanted to stay and play basically for his estate team where he grew up. And he said watching Chris Rigg play for this estate team was almost hilarious because he would literally do everything. He would be at left back, he would be at right back. He would be cajoling the other kids along. He'd be dragging them with him, who obviously were nowhere near as talented. But Chris Rigg just wanted to drag his area and the team he was playing for forward. He wasn't bothered about the Wallsend Boys Club or anything like that. Obviously, football got a bit more serious for him, but that's the sort of mentality that he has. And I think because he's been around so long, we forget actually how young he is. I think he's only just turned 19. So to play the amount of games that he's played, and obviously he scored his first Premier League goal, I thought away at Newcastle he was actually really, really, really good. So yeah, he's definitely one to watch. And this is we did an episode of this show, didn't we, last season, saying does he need a loan? I don't think he does. I think he's exactly the right place to develop.
Yeah, and we're good developers as a football club. We are generally pretty good at developing players, so you trust the judgment of the powers that be. Is there anything else you want to touch on before we wrap this one up?
No, not really. I mean, something's probably happened as we're on air, which always seems to be the case, doesn't it? So
nobody's texted us. So
nobody's texted me either, so that's good news. But
it means we're good friends. So.
No, you're my only friend these days, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be a slow burner of a summer, but I think there's going to be flashes of real excitement as well. And I think we've seen after the Xhaka stuff that maybe Sunderland are a little more stronger than we think they are, which is, I think, a massive positive. Whether they can continue that through, who knows, because we're seeing some pretty big clubs being bullied essentially at the moment through a combination of external market forces and just bad planning. But you look at the time Newcastle United are having this transfer window, and it's tough for them at the moment. So whether Sunderland would ever get to that point where all of their players sort of develop at once and then all want to leave in the same summer, I think is a real risk at some point. And I think we could actually learn a lot from what's gone on up the road would be my final point. And as Sunderland fans, it is funny, but I think enjoy it while you can, because you never know when something like that's going to come around the corner for you. And the Granit Xhaka thing encapsulates it, because a lot of Newcastle fans were all over that about Sunderland's captain wanting to jump ship, and lo and behold, literally 10 days later, after that story broke, their captain wants to jump ship. So 10 days, not a long time in football.
No, it isn't. And to be honest, that's why I've tempered my. It's funny. Look, it is funny that Bruno Guimaraes wants to leave, but like, it's not as funny as it was because I'm like, do you know what? We had this the other week, and it's not nice. And like, fundamentally, it's one of them.
Other people will find it all the more funny for what we've. You know, like
it's more that
they have a pop at us, we have a pop at them, and it just builds, doesn't it?
It's more that it's the whole, Arsenal. It's the same thing Chelsea try to do with us. Arsenal have decided what the value of Bruno Guimaraes is. Like, to Newcastle, he is not worth 55 million. To Newcastle, he's worth far more than that. It's the same way that Xhaka was worth to us 30 plus million, and Chelsea were like, no, he's not. He's worth 10 because he's 34 in September. And I think that there needs to be stuff done in football about that, because I don't think it's right, even though I don't care about Newcastle, but I don't think it's right generally that sort of the big teams in this country basically are bullies in the transfer market and can kind of just do what they want.
I think the way clubs are operating as well, that there potentially should be some more rules and regulations about how these deals are sorted out and presented to the public. It sort of feels like the Wild West at the moment. There's all this chatter about Guimaraes and what he wants, and him wanting to leave Newcastle, and Arsenal putting a bid in, but there actually hasn't been a bid yet. So we saw it with Xhaka, isn't it? We're almost sort of seeing these transfers being agitated for before they actually come down the line. And maybe we need to get back to the process of bidding and then talking to the player, not talking to the player and bidding. And that was always the rule, wasn't it? But that rule doesn't really seem to be enforced. And I get a lot of questions saying, how can clubs agree a deal with our captain without us approving it? And the answer is they shouldn't really, but it just goes on in football, and it is unregulated.
And every club does it.
Like, 100%. We'll have done it loads of times.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it, but just the culture and the way things work has completely changed. And there's a lot of conversations, I think, go on behind the scenes. And I get it, because you're not going to bid for a player unless you know that he wants to come, because that's just a waste of everybody's time. But then the rules should probably reflect that instead of saying the other thing, which isn't enforced. It's just bizarre. It creates confusion in the minds of fans as well.
No, it absolutely does. But anyway, we'll wrap this one up. Thanks for watching the first kind of episode, but probably about my 50th episode of the Disco Pants podcast. So subscribe if you haven't already. Check out James' stuff on the Sunderland Echo. I'm sure you are. If you are watching this, I'm sure you are checking out James' stuff. But do that. Check out my channel as well. I have a sponsor, which is actually on screen here, which doesn't sponsor the Disco Pants podcast, but we'll give them a plug anyway. So we've got a sponsor on the Serenity cause. So thanks to them for supporting my channel. And like the video, hype the video. That's the new function, James. You need to tell people to hype the video now. You get hype points.
I have no idea what hype is in terms of YouTube. Sorry.
You need to hype the video.
Okay, I just is liking the video not enough anymore.
Like and hype.
Okay.
Like
I will remember to do that.
Hype.
Why did they bring hype in those?
I don't know. I don't work for Google. I don't know. You get hype points. So I hype videos. So like I hype other content creators. I hyped Michael Bowers the other day. I hype Taft stuff. I go on beyond the big six and hype my own stuff.
Of course you do.
So you've got to hype. I don't know what it does. I've not seen any evidence that it improves algorithm, but it probably does. So anyway, hype the video. There we are. And let us know you've hyped it, and then we'll hype you down the line somehow. Yeah,
I'll go through and hype everybody.
Next week, should we do a pre-season preview next week as well? Do you think that makes sense?
We probably should, I reckon so. I don't know what day that'll be, but
we'll figure it out.
Let's do it.
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out, absolutely.
So we'll see you then. Thanks for watching.